Hey, it's Gino here from Real Everyday English. Join me in this week's episode when we tackle Unit 5 of this famous English grammar book, English Grammar in Use by Raymond Murphy. Let's do this. Hello people, happy Sunday. Welcome back to the channel. It's me, Gino, from Real Everyday English. How are you today? I hope you're good. I feel great. I hope you do too. So today we're going to crack on with this English Grammar in Use book. You remember I started doing a video series where I'm teaching the contents of this book because I believe it's extremely useful. Now you might be thinking, hang on a minute Gino, we've jumped from Unit 2 straight to Unit 5. Well, there's a reason for that, and that is because Units 3 and 4 are basically a regurgitation of Units 1 and 2. So I don't think it's useful to explain what it says in Unit 3 and 4 when we've already covered the topic. So without any further ado, let's get on with Unit 5. And the topic for Unit 5 is the past simple tense. Past simple. And the main reason we use the past simple is to describe things that happened in a particular time in the past. So quite often it's necessary to know when we were talking about. Was it yesterday, or was it the day before, or was it last year? Anyway, we'll cover all that as we get into it. So without any further ado, let's start with the sentence structure and how we conjugate the verb. Let's go. Okay, so as you already know, in English there are two kinds of verbs. There are regular verbs, i.e. the verbs that follow a particular pattern, and there are the irregular verbs. And the irregular verbs, they don't follow the normal rules, just to confuse you. And it's not just English that has these irregular verbs. Many other languages have them as well. I speak Spanish, and I know that Spanish has quite a lot of irregular verbs. But we're going to start with the regular verbs. Now, for all intensive purposes, with regular verbs, you need the infinitive of the verb plus ed. So it's the infinitive plus ed. And to give you some examples of how that might work, so if we use the verb work, work becomes worked. I worked yesterday. Scratch, scratch, I'm scratching my head. The verb scratch becomes scratched. I scratched my head. He scratched his arm on the wall. Something like that. Blink, the verb to blink. When you close and open your eyes quickly. Blink. I blinked. He blinked. She blinked. They blinked. We blinked. This is where English is, in my opinion, more simple than other languages, because with regular verbs for past simple tense, it doesn't matter who you're talking about, it's still the same. It's still the same verb structure. It doesn't change. I worked, he worked, she worked, they worked, we worked. And that is a lot more simple than some of the other languages out there, because some of the other languages out there have a different verb ending for each individual, depending on who you're talking about. So if you're talking about we, it's different to if you're talking about they, and so on and so forth. Okay, so now we've covered the regular verbs, let's look at some different verbs that are not exactly regular. I wouldn't class this next category, or the next two categories actually, as irregular verbs, because they still do follow a pattern. It's just that you have to be aware of the verb ending. We'll cover irregular verbs after we've covered these next two. So the next 2 points I want to raise with you is there are some differences to the just adding ed to the end of the infinitive. And the first one is when verbs end in an e. So when the verbs already end in an e, we just add a d. We don't add an ed, because that would be a double ed and it would change the pronunciation of the word. So let's give you some examples. So the verb to live in the past tense becomes lived. So you can see that I've just added the d onto the end of lived. Live. I lived in Manchester in the 1990s, or something like that. And also with these next two categories, the same applies, that it doesn't change depending on who you're talking about. I, you, she, we, they. It doesn't matter. It still remains the same. So to give you another example, the verb to close, that becomes closed. So you can see again, I've just added the D, and we're talking about verbs that end in an E right here, right now. To give you another example, wipe. So if I have like a cloth and I wipe the wall or I wipe my face, you can see that the past tense, I simply add a D. It becomes wiped. So for verbs that end in E, we simply add a D. Moving on to the next one, which is verbs that end in Y. But not only verbs that end in Y, verb that ends in Y that is preceded by a consonant. A consonant is any letter of the alphabet which isn't one of the vowels, A, E, I, O, U. So if a verb ends in a Y and the Y is preceded, i.e. the letter before it is a consonant, then what we do is we replace the Y with an I, then we add the ED. So to give you an example, the verb to spy. When somebody is, to spy means when you're watching somebody and they don't know that you're watching them. So you're spying on them. The verb to spy becomes spied. And again, the same applies. It doesn't matter who you're talking about. I spied, she spied, they spied, we spied. Another verb that follows this pattern is the verb envy. Now, the verb to envy is another word for jealousy, but to envy is the action of actually envying someone. So envy becomes envied. We replace the Y with the I and then we add the ED. And to give you one more, the verb to study, which I'm sure you all know because you study English every day, I'm sure. Consistency takes you towards your goals. And the verb study becomes studied. So you can see that I've removed the Y, I've replaced it with an I, and then I've added the ED. Okay, and now we need to cover irregulars. Now, there are lots of irregulars, and I couldn't even begin to teach you all of them. Not in this short video anyway. The idea is to learn the most commonly used irregular verbs. So then you get, with irregulars, you just have to learn them. I have the same problem. I'm a language student myself. I've learned a language as an adult. I understand that it's complicated, but you just have to learn them. But I'm going to give you some examples. And as with the previous three topics that I've just covered, it doesn't matter who you're talking about. Again, this is where English for me is more simple than other languages. Spanish, for example, is the conjugation. The conjugation is much easier, I think anyway. Personal opinion. I'm sure you might disagree, but I think that's the case. Okay, so to build. So, for example, to build, if you don't know what that means, it means to construct something. So, for example, someone might build a house, and build becomes built. So you can see with that particular verb, we just replace the D with a T. Another one is the verb to run. Run becomes ran. So that's an irregular verb as well. The verb to teach, I am teaching you English right now. But if I was telling somebody about this tomorrow, then I might say, yesterday, I taught my students how to speak English. So teach becomes taught. So they are the irregular verbs. You just have to learn them. But again, one thing that is on your side is that it doesn't change no matter who you're talking about. Next topic we need to cover in relation to the past simple tense is questions and negatives. Now, to ask questions in the past simple tense and to describe negatives, we need the auxiliary verb to do. But the auxiliary verb to do needs to be in the past simple tense, which is did. So let's talk about the negatives first. So if you think back to when I described regular verbs, you will notice that it was I worked, he worked, I enjoyed, she enjoyed, we enjoyed. We don't have to use the word did in that sentence. But when we're talking about negatives, So when you didn't enjoy something, you need the auxiliary verb to do in the past tense, which I have already explained is did. So to give you some examples about that, we contract it as well. Before we go any further, I need you to know that we contract it. So I did not enjoy my dinner last night. I did not enjoy. We very rarely say it like that. Did not becomes didn't. So I didn't enjoy my dinner last night. And again, it doesn't matter who you're talking about, it stays the same. They didn't enjoy their dinner last night. We didn't enjoy the meal last night, and so on and so forth. So that is how we construct the negatives. We use the auxiliary verb to do, which is did in the past simple tense, and then we add not, which we contract into didn't. I didn't like it. He didn't go to work. She didn't pick up my groceries. We also use this same kind of structure to ask questions. So to ask a question, for example, did you enjoy this video lesson today? If you did, give it a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments below. Did you enjoy the video lesson today? Something else that you might hear as well is you might hear the word when added to the front of the question. So if you're not only asking if someone did something, but you want to know when they did it, for example, you can say, when did you start working your current job? When did you go to the shopping centre last? Or something like that. So that's how we ask questions. We use the auxiliary verb to do in the past tense, which is did. The last little topic that we need to cover today is how to conjugate the verb to be in the past simple tense. So the verb to be is am, is, are, as we know, and in the past tense for I, he, she, or it becomes was, and the negative is wasn't. So I was angry yesterday because my brother was annoying me. I was happy last week because I got a pay rise. For we, you, and they, the verb to be becomes were, or the negative is weren't. They were happy because the boss had given them a pay rise. They were busy because 100 customers came into the shop. Okay, people, that's it for this week's video. That's the second video of 2020. 2020 is going to be a big year for Real Everyday English and a big year for your English as well. Like I told you, like I promised you at the beginning of the year, if your goal is to improve your English and be a more confident English speaker, I can definitely help you do that, and I'm going to release weekly content to take you towards that goal. If you enjoyed the video, please comment, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. Please share it with your English learning friends who you feel may also benefit from this. I'm on a mission to reach as many people as I can and help as many people as I can improve their English. One of the main motivations for me to keep making these videos is, for one, I actually enjoy doing them, and two, whenever I ask people why they are learning English, it's always to reach some kind of goal, some kind of life goals. And I have goals myself I'm working on, I want to reach. And if I'm helping someone else take a step towards their goal, even if it's just a little bit, then that makes me happy inside. And yeah, so on that note, hasta luego, people. See you soon. Bye-bye.